Hello, everyone, and welcome to our event today, 8 Critical Moves to Empower Leaders to Increase Their Value. This is a really compelling and important topic focused on improving leadership in today's volatile business environment. And we're featuring 2 experts today, Fredrik Schuller and Lance Wilke, both of BTS. They head up the consultancy's talent, learning, and leadership practices in EMEA and the Americas, respectively. I'm your moderator, Claude Werder from Brandon Hall Group. I want to thank BTS, moving on to the next slide, for sponsoring today's webinar. Always happy to have them sponsor. They're a great partner. For over 3 decades now, they've been designing powerful experiences that have a profound and lasting impact on businesses and their people. BTS helps the world's leading companies turn strategy into results. Their next generation approach combines deep business knowledge with transformational development to help your people and your company evolve together. BTS equips leaders for tomorrow by inspiring new ways of thinking, and they build critical capabilities and make strategy personal. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with Brandon Hall Group, we're a human capital management research and advisory firm that empowers excellence in organizations around the world using our research and research-related tools. Quick mention, we also run certification programs, and we have several that are open for enrollment, including our Certified Learning Strategist and Leadership Development Strategist programs. Visit certification.brandonhall.com to learn more about how to earn that designation. Now, a few logistics. To ask questions, please use the question panel on your control bar. We'll leave time at the end for questions and might take some during the presentation as well. This webinar is being recorded, and we'll share a link to the recording and a PDF of the presentation via email in 24 hours or so. If you'd like to download a copy of today's presentation instantly, the link to do so will be available in the chat shortly. Chat is also open for today, and we really hope you'll share your thoughts and experiences as we go along. Your feedback and perspective on what Fredrik and Lance present and on your own experience will make the webinar more valuable for everyone. So please join in on today's discussion and share your thoughts as we go through, or simply just pop in, say hello, and let us know where you're joining from today. So as you get settled in, we would love it if you would share in the chat maybe some of the questions or issues you have coming into the session today related to talent, learning, and leadership development. It's great to learn what's going on for everyone, and if possible, we'll try to touch on some of these things during the session. So here's the agenda today. As we take you through the 8 critical moves to increase leader value. We'll start with introductions and then provide some context. And then we're going to break the 8 moves into 3 groups. The first group involves making bold investments in core leadership. Then we'll talk about accelerating the talent system to deliver more with less, and end up with how to scale the learning culture to help people adapt. We'll fold in some poll questions, some examples of what leading customers are doing. BTS customers, and then I mentioned we welcome your questions and comments along the way, so we'll leave some time for that at the end. So just a little bit more about Fredrik and Lance before we get started. Fredrik is based in his native Norway now and also spent 15 years in the San Francisco Bay Area. His experience working with leaders at some of Silicon Valley's fastest growing tech companies and the world's largest energy organizations has kept him on the cutting edge of building client results. Lance leads the BTS team in Chicago and central areas in North America. He's spent 15 years designing and delivering consulting engagements aimed at sharpening strategic execution and leadership development across many different disciplines. So you're in great hands today. And now I'll hand it over to Lance. Lance?
Great. Thanks so much, Claude. Nice to be here with all of you today. We're really excited to dive into a little bit of our research that we've been doing, a little bit of experience with our clients. We wanted to let you know we have a bit of a care package. So if there's anything here that you find especially interesting, there's a few things that can accompany this presentation. The white paper itself that this was built off of, some case studies, what some of the most progressive companies are out there doing and where they're seeing success. There's a podcast also associated with this research. And of course, the connections you make here. We've had plenty of folks asked us to come in and do deep dives into different aspects of those 8 priorities that we'll get into here. So hopefully you'll find something that is really interesting. Hopefully you'll follow up on it. We'd love to be able to do that for you. You can see the QR code that you can access that information on, and I think we can post the links as well. And so with that, setting a little bit of the context for why we did this research, set these priorities, it is in the face of a whole lot of uncertainty. Isn't that right, Fredrik?
That is certainly right. So you might think about why now, why this, and why the 8 critical moves that we got here to deliver value in 2023. We're halfway through the year, and I don't feel like I'm any closer on closing in on the uncertainty that's ahead. It's still really uncertain of an environment. Many regions in the world are experiencing significant increases in cost of living. Interest rates keep rising, and it's resulting in tightening of financial conditions. So it's forecast to be about a 2.7% growth rate by the IMF this year. And that's the weakest growth profile since 2001, if we exclude COVID and the financial crisis. So, and we're also seeing worrying signs out of China that could even slow this down further. So it certainly is a difficult environment. So there's talks of an impending global or national recessions or soft landings, and it's really influencing. We're seeing how companies are spending or what they're doing. Some are really conservative, and others are using this as an opportunity to get an edge. So we see a lot of enterprises are affected by these conditions, but there's also a lot of leading organizations that are really finding a way through this uncertainty and investing for 23 and beyond. So one thing that I thought maybe would be interesting is to look a little bit at how has spending in our space been going during the last couple of years. So if you were to guess, like how much, if you look at just the people development and learning, the spending in 2019 was about $370 billion. So it's actually a lot of money being spent into this space. Now, COVID happened, and so many of the organizations had this incredible humane response to it, really trying to help out their employees and train them to be successful in the new environment. But despite that, it actually shrunk. So if you look at it in 2020, it shrunk a little bit, actually much less than one would think. And it's probably because the human-centric approach to it. 2021, do you think it went up or down? Well, it rebounded to about $373 billion in spend. But that's only a 1% increase from 2019, but it was a 4% increase from the year before. And now this year is projected to be $393 billion, which is a 5% growth. And what that tells us is there's actually an increase in spending going on in our industry and in this space. But what we're seeing a lot of companies struggling with is the fact that like companies are resource constrained and their time of the learner is really put under pressure. We've heard more than ever that people are busy, they don't find time for this. So while the money is there and the ambition is there, it's really fighting for mind share, both with leaders and with employees among the clients. So if you think about the session today, it's not like we're going to show you a bunch of things that you maybe have never seen before. We're going to talk more about what do we see the best companies are doing today. Some of these things might be familiar to you. Some of this might have some counterintuitive ways of thinking, and some of this might be new to you. So it's going to be a little bit of a mix, and I hope that you enjoy it. And I'll give Lance the opportunity to go a little bit deeper on the white paper that comes along with this too. So Lance, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Fredrik. Yeah, so with that as the backdrop, you think about all the uncertainty, some things positive, some things negative, so much transformation happening across virtually every single industry. Our aim was to talk to many of our clients, talking to a lot of chief learning officers, chief talent officers coming into the year amidst all of the uncertainty and trying to figure out, okay, great, the spend is there, as you just saw from Fredrik, but with less time, less change capacity, with this sort of notion that you've got to be able to do more with less, maybe playing fewer chips, if you will, sort of the analogy, where should you play those? And that's what we wanted to focus on here. So we narrowed it down, talking with all of those folks that I mentioned before to 8 critical moves that we heard over and over again from these companies that you might consider the most progressive, that even during hard or uncertain times are really using leadership development, their talent strategy to drive differences and to truly charge up their business strategy and the transformation that they're going through. So we're going to get into those 8 priorities, those 8 critical moves. One thing that I'm going to note before we get into it, if you know anything about BTS, perhaps some of you have worked with us in the past, you know that we are, for 40 years, have been about building amazing simulations that can be used in so many different ways. And you're going to note that that notion comes up often as we go through these 8 different priorities. And we're helping our clients build what we call simulation cultures, because simulation is, well, many reasons. I mean, it's considered the most effective method for learning new behaviors. It provides opportunity to learn by doing. You can make and learn from mistakes in a real life context, but also within a safe environment. They're a powerful methodology to bring the entire company along and really help people understand your unique strategy, what you're aiming after, your business model, the aspirational culture that you're after, and make it deeply personal for all of your people. As you evolve with this, the foundation, your institutional wisdom gets stronger and stronger in these models over time. So they're really a powerful mechanism that can be used even beyond development. They remove bias as we think about different assessment opportunities in our hiring, our selection, our succession planning. And so we see a lot of companies, especially with the way that technology is able to supercharge this, building opportunities to build a simulation culture within their organizations, which of course requires some certain capabilities and intent behind it. So as we go through the different priorities here, I hope you'll keep these things in mind, and you'll keep in mind some of the more progressive tools that you can use across all of the priorities. So with that in mind, why don't we go ahead and hop into the research itself. So what are the leading enterprises focusing on to thrive in 2023 amidst all of this uncertainty? The first bucket of priorities we'll talk about is making bold investments in core leadership. It's really tailored to equip your people to navigate the uncertainty, ensure business continuity, and take that transformation in stride. The second bucket we'll talk about here is making your talent system deliver enterprise outcomes in a time when there are only so many chips to play. We hear it time and time again, how much fatigue there is, how we're at capacity in terms of spending time on this, while the need has never been more dire or urgent. And the third thing that we'll talk about is scaling a learning culture. This is beginning to be a really popular phrase. I'll bet many of you have used this. Many organizations are out there aspiring to build learning cultures that are inquisitive and curious and agile, and helping your people adapt during these times. So we're going to talk a little bit about, again, what some of the best companies are doing. We're going to try to deliver a little bit of the uncommon insight as well, associated with some of those moves that organizations are making. So first things first, let's dive into that first bucket, that making bold investments in core leadership. We've got 3 aspects to this that we wanted to talk about. The first is, how do we unlock frontline leader capability and build that capability in the face of higher and higher expectations while having such little time and having to keep pace. Many companies are having trouble keeping pace, building their frontline leader capabilities at the same pace that they're hoping to grow their businesses. Second thing we want to talk about is what the best are doing around creating change-ready mid-level leaders. It is very cliche. We talk about mid-level leaders, that frozen middle, they're stuck in the middle between executive leadership and what the front line is out there trying to achieve. But this is actually getting more urgent because there's so much transformation happening. We see the best organizations actually creating change capability as a core competency in mid-level leaders. We'll talk more about that. And then the third thing we want to talk about associated with this first bucket is the business continuity through really proactive, deliberate, systematic C-level and executive succession planning, building out that bench, and not just stopping there, but doing truly world-class onboarding. Claude, I know that Brandon Hall observes quite a bit in these regards, probably have some research here, and maybe you wanted to share a little bit of the perspective that the group has as it relates to these 3 topics.
Sure. So we're seeing a lot of change. You know, back just a few years ago, even a couple of years ago, working with frontline leaders and mid-level leaders was toward the bottom of the priority. Executives and senior leaders got a lot of the attention. And so also succession planning rated very low in the priority level, but that's all changed now. Frontline and mid-level leadership development is far more of a focus for I think about 65% of organizations. What they're still struggling with a little bit is some of the training is too event focused still. It's one-off type of training, not necessarily the kind of practical training that Lance was talking about a minute ago. Same thing with mid-level leaders. And succession, more attention is being paid to it, but they struggle with it because there hasn't been a good infrastructure where high-level leaders were really invested in succession planning. So many organizations are kind of starting from scratch and trying to build up from what they've been doing in the past. So we're going to, Lance is going to drill down on that a little bit. But before we do that, we want to get a sense of what your thoughts are related, particularly about frontline leadership. So the question we'd like you to weigh in on in our poll, the first of 3 today, is how confident is your organization in preparing your frontline leaders fast enough to keep up with the changing role that leaders expect now? So we have these expectations. How do you feel? How confident are you in developing your frontline leaders fast enough? Are you not very confident at all? Slightly confident? Moderately confident? Or, yeah, we're doing good. We're certain. We're very confident that we're doing this the right way. So always like to see where everyone is, where they stand, and that helps us as we go forward to understand where you all are. So we'll give a few more seconds, and then our producer Melissa will tell us where we're at. And let's see. So very few are certain or very confident, which is not surprising. And about 75, almost 3/4, either slightly confident or moderately confident. And then about 20%, about a fifth are not very confident. So I would say that that's pretty much what we find in our research on an ongoing basis, that if you look at these as 3 levels of maturity related to frontline leadership development, the majority are kind of in the middle trying to find their way. And hopefully some of what we have to say today will help you along those lines. Turn it back over to you, Lance.
Great, thanks, Claude. Yeah, so let's get into this a little bit, and we're seeing a lot of, I think, what Claude just mentioned and the Brandon Hall Group is seeing. I mean, for front lines, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but boy, really increased expectations, and coupled with that fatigue and limited capacity in terms of developing really massive deficits. Then, so it's sort of both ends of the equation. We're demanding more, and in a lot of instances, not doing nearly enough for them. For mid-level, I mean, it's a lot of organizational models have been switched to look less hierarchical, but boy, they still struggle with a lot of the same things, whether it's slow decision-making or just feeling like they're being held hostage between seeing what's happening on the front lines with customers and trying to get buy-in from the rest of the organization to make agile and quick in-the-moment changes. Sometimes some organizations are saying we're actually not seeing a lot of support, not a lot of role modeling of these aspirational leadership expectations and culture that we're trying to establish in the organization. And boy, now more than ever, and I'll bet many of you on this meeting right now are feeling this, wearing multiple hats. And so playing all sorts of different roles, special projects and initiatives. And then the last piece, the business continuity, executive succession, boy, this has been so secretive for so long, isn't it? It's such a complex web of stakeholders, the board gets involved. It's really, really difficult. And yet, boy, again, it's kind of on both ends here. It's really challenging because we see a lot of people retiring and executive turnover is at an all-time high. And so this problem is being compounded where we're not doing this far enough advance. Are we doing it in the most unbiased way possible? Are we truly seeing people's and their capabilities for what they are before they ever get into these new roles? There's a lot that can be done to improve executive succession and onboarding. So we'll talk about all of these a little bit. I wanted to start with this. So a little bit of our research that says how the expectations of frontline leaders, and this applies to all leaders in some way, particularly front lines are the most massive groups of leaders that we have in our organizations, how the expectations on them have changed and evolved over the years. We start here. So This is sort of the classic way that we look at people managers, right? It's a focus on what people do. It's about, listen, you lead people, you're a manager, it's about driving performance, getting results through others. And you see the classic things that we try to develop in people, and that's their ability to give feedback, right? And coach and instill accountability in their people. And for quite a long time, this is, at the end of the day, this is what we expected of leaders. But, fast forward about 10 or 15 years ago, you see a number of different operating models that started to crop up. And so organizations trying to get more agile, more responsive, we start asking leaders to build fail fast learning cultures, right? Cultures of innovation. And so accompanying that was this next generation of leadership expectations, not just about driving performance, but now a focus on how people think. So the output that we're getting out of folks in order to be able to unlock those modern operating models. And so now it's about, okay, not just performance, but are you unlocking people's intelligence? Are we establishing growth mindset, right? Are we able to permit mistakes and learn from those mistakes? Okay, great. So if you're a leader here saying, you're expecting a lot more of me, but it didn't stop there. And so really accelerated. Of course, I know we're all feeling this in the last few years. It's not just about what people do and think, but of course, it's about being in touch with how they feel. It's about inspiring connection. And so we see a lot of course, talk in the last few years about, are you driving engagement in the folks around you? Resilience, psychological safety, is wellness a consideration? And of course, inclusivity as we're building more diverse workforces. And so a couple of the takeaways from this research are, one, boy, the expectations have been reset twice for leaders in the last 15 years or so. So, if your head is spinning a little bit trying to figure out what you're going to develop in people, it's for good reason. The second takeaway here is that Generation 2 doesn't replace Generation 1, and Generation 3 doesn't replace Generation 2. These are cumulative expectations that we have on leaders. And so when we're feeling that, wow, it is harder now than ever to be a leader, actually a lot of truth behind that. At least that is what our research would indicate. And so I wanted to bring this to life a bit here through a story.
Yeah, so we've selected a few BTS client stories to talk about. This first one is about a major technology company that has been growing so fast, like a lot of technology companies have, and they realized its growth could be endangered by growing their frontline leaders too slowly. And so, Fredrik, can you give us some highlights of the challenge this company is experiencing? I think you're on mute.
There it happened. I said this would happen. I apologize. So it's right there on the screen in the main side that they were growing fast, and they were realizing that one of the limiting factors for growth might be how fast they could get frontline leaders up and running and up and being successful in the role under the conditions that Lance just shared. So it's kind of interesting that a technology company is not the technology, is not the sales. It might actually be the frontline leaders that could hamper the growth.
So what have they been doing to try to move the needle?
So they're quite innovative. And what they did was to flip the script and develop the new managers before they get enrolled, not after. So they created a program that went over 8 months. So it was not a one-off type thing. It was actually prolonged for aspiring leaders, where they would learn all about how it would be to be a people leader, the core skills, the mindsets to be successful, how they think, how they make other people feel. And they did it all before they were even selected for the roles. So yeah, quite different, I would say.
Besides not knowing before they were selected for the roles, what else is different about this program that makes it stand out?
So the couple of things that really makes it stand out. The first is that you actually have to do the program to be considered to be a people manager. So it's a rite of passage, if you like, and it is true scale. So last year, over 10,000 people participated. That's quite different too than most of the frontline programs we experienced. And it's very technology driven, but it was also fun. It had self-paced elements. It was gamified, but it also had community elements, working in coaching pods for people to share, talk, practice. And it had a design that again, flipped the script where it was really focusing on what we wanted people to do and test, rather than what they want to learn, and then ask, what do we need to learn to be able to do those things and do those experiments that we call go tries? And then using the pod coaching sessions with other 6 to 8 other people to debrief what worked, what didn't work, how do we adjust, and going on. So we actually did more than 10,000 coaching pods as part of that in the last year too. So you get a little bit of feel for the scale here. That is both, it's not just a self-paced course, you're actually having connection all the way through it, but it's gamified, it's fun, it's different.
And what's the impact been? What kind of results?
There's kind of at different levels. I think the first level that's really important is for the participant itself and for the organization, because the participants had the opportunity to evaluate, is people leadership something that I want to do? Is it something that, will I be good at it? Will I enjoy it? Will I enjoy that shift in role? So we saw a lot of people self-selecting out and saying technical tracks are the way that I want to go. And that's really great, because then you don't get people into role who will not be good at it or enjoy it. And other people that maybe were on the fence that were jumping in and say, yeah, this is for me, I'm excited about this. From the company perspective, they were able to evaluate who are engaged in this, who's showing promise, who's taking on the right mindsets along the way here, and what results are they having, so that they could actually do a much better selection of who they would give the roles to. And then it had 2 other ways, like, so we measured things like the participant reactions, and the feedback was great. And when we measured the shifts that we were targeting, over 90% of the participants made the shifts. But it also drove positive impact on engagement of not just attendees, but the people that work for them, and drove down attrition. So it's quite impactful way of going about it.
So what would be kind of a couple of the key takeaways for our attendees to take away from this story?
And sometimes we're so stuck in the way that things have always been done, that transitional programs happens after you're in the role. What about flipping the script? What about thinking about it differently and say, hey, how might we get a different outcome if we think about the problem in a different way? I think that's what I really enjoy about this case.
Yeah, great.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, I'll grab it here. We wanted to give you another client story focused more on that third area that we were talking about. So succession at senior levels. And you're going to hear from one of our partners here, Teal, in just a moment on video. And Teal's going to talk a little bit about the process that she's undertaken with one of her clients, and note some of the things that she's going to talk about. Remember, when we teed this up, we said simulation culture. Boy, using simulation, really an amazing way, in an unbiased way, to put people into roles before they ever get there and let them showcase the skills and capabilities that they have. In fact, they may never have gotten the opportunity to do that until then. And so there's a few steps here that we see the most progressive world-class organizations taking as it relates to being really, really proactive with executive succession. And why don't we go ahead and play that video and tell that story.
So a client came to us because they had recently gotten an assessment from a talent advisor saying that their executive bench was not deep enough, nor did it have the right breadth of experiences and competencies in order for them to succeed into the future. They came to BTS because they wanted a different opinion in terms of how they might assess their executives for readiness in the face of both a CEO transition that was coming in the next 5 to 10 years, as well as key roles of COO and CFO. So at BTS, what we did was create a custom CEO profile, as well as a custom senior leader profile. We were differentiated because we created forward-looking profiles. We happened to know that in the oil and gas industry at this time, it was a very turbulent time in the market with energy transition, and we knew that there were unknown challenges, there were unknown decisions to be made about the portfolio, and they needed a different way of thinking. Additionally, we were able to layer in their values blueprint over our profiles. So not only could we assess for business acumen and forward thinking, but we could also ground those assessments in the values that were really important to the culture of the company. To complement those profiles and bring them to life, we created a customized business simulation that we used in what we call a leader lab. In the leader lab, we had 25 of the executives or of the leaders selected from this company in teams of 5. Each team had an assessor embedded into the team so they could look at the participants from an individual standpoint as they each went through 3 individual assessment and role plays, but they also were able to evaluate how they showed up as a leader of self, of others, and a member of the team. So it was truly a multidimensional look at how they were leading the business. At this point in time, we have now assessed the top 100 of this client. They have only 1,300 employees, so we're at about 10% for this company. And now the client has a heat map of every participant who has gone through, showing where they are strong and where they have room for development. And they have been able to use this data to inform development plans, as well as find out how to retain some of their key employees. For example, one of the people who showed up in the top 3 of one of our cohorts actually had never had a global role before. This person had been in supply chain, and while they were very influential within that function, had never been able to lift out. This person demonstrated exceptional capabilities, and as a result of this assessment, they created a new role for this person so that the impact that they could have as a leader on the organization would be magnified. Similarly, the person that they thought was going to be the next CEO did not show up in the top 5. So that person then got an executive coach, and within weeks, we started receiving emails from this person's direct reports indicating that true change was happening and that this person was really working hard. Other insights that were uncovered was that this company did not have a shared leadership language, nor did they have a solid business acumen foundation outside of their functions. So as an approach for broader people development, we now have partnerships with this client to address both of those elements, and we now run this leader lab every year so that the client is improving the breadth and depth of their organizational leaders.
Perfect. Thanks, Teal. So to round out this first area, making bold investments in core leadership, and I think I need to go back to sharing my screen. Give me one sec. Here we go. While we could spend a whole lot of time talking just about these, we of course only have so much time with you. So wanted to round this out by just summing up a little bit. As you think about what the best are doing in these regards, so with front lines, consider those expectations, right? It's about performance, it's about thinking, it's about feeling, and how can you use that research to figure out what does your organization need right now and in what dose? Because you can't simply work on all of those skills equally. Your leaders will get completely overwhelmed. So as you think about the trajectory of the business and where you can flex your leadership development efforts, what do you need to focus on? What do your leaders need right now? At the mid-level, how do you get your mid-level to be able to act on that flow of customer-centric data they're getting while also being guided by their senior leaders? Incorporating change leadership into their repertoire. This is what's going to enable business transformation at scale and at the speed that you want your business to move. And as you think about that business continuity, C-suite level, executive level succession, think about a few of the things that Teal talked about there, creating that forward-looking profile, not getting mired in generic or old views of performance, really dialed into where the organization and the strategy is taking it, and really building it in a nuanced way that people really understand and can create transparency and clarity. And then when you have that, well, you can do really meaningful assessment, even at these really, really senior levels. And that assessment can be used for both selection purposes, and you may see some surprises, as well as development purposes. It can inform your development efforts up and down the organization. You could hear all of that fantastic learning that occurred for that oil and gas client. With that, we're going to move on to priority 2. And here, Fredrik, I think I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. It's inspiring, that story, isn't it? So then the second priority we have labeled accelerating the talent systems to deliver more with less. So let's take a look at what the critical moves under that is. So the first is to embed an employee-focused leadership framework in language. I'll talk a little bit more about this when we go deeper, but so many here have very generic, hard to understand models that have no impact. Second move is to implement adaptive and dynamic hypo selection and development approaches. So it's a little bit double clicking on what Teal was talking about in the video. and looking at like so much of hypo selection and development is not selecting the right people, nor is it developing future focused skills. So we'll double click a little bit on that. And then how do you scale effective external candidate acquisition processes to win the war for talents? That'll be the third of the topics. But before we go deeper into this, I'm curious from Claude's side, what are you seeing in this space from your research?
Yeah, real quick, I think the most important thing that we've found is that goes to the first point about the framework. And a lot of times organizations don't have a consistent approach to leadership development. And so if you're trying to do more development at lower levels of the organization, and people are doing it in different ways with focused on different values and different approaches, it can almost make things worse rather than better if there's a lack of consistency. And so I think that's one of the biggest things that we've found. And so we kind of want to see where you are on this before we drill deeper. We've got another quick poll question for you. And it's pretty straightforward. How well do your leaders understand what's expected of them now? And so that they can, so that they can practically apply those expectations on the job. So how well do they understand what they need to do? Do they have no understanding, little understanding, good understanding, or excellent understanding? And that kind of ties in what I was talking about the framework. Is everybody pulling in the same direction? Do they understand what their expectations are and what they're being trained to do, and what the organization needs from them and wants from them? So it'll be interesting to see where people are on this. And I can compare it to what our research showed. So this is actually a little bit better than our research. So you folks are a little bit ahead of the game. About 57%, almost 60% feel like leaders have a good understanding, which is great to see. And about 36% have little understanding, and very few have no understanding or excellent understanding, which is to be expected. So I think you're obviously headed in the right direction, and hopefully, again, we can help you move forward with some of the things we're going to share.
Thanks, Claude. So if we think about when we've been talking to clients, we'll be seeing what's going on and what we hear back. It's there's a few themes that come up about what's not working. So first, if we look at the leadership frameworks and language that's in organizations, well-intentioned HR teams, external consultants often use generic leadership frameworks and integrate them into the HR systems and processes. And often it feels really divorced from the strategy. So it often lacks input and awareness from the people who they impact the most, the employees and the leaders. And they focus too much on what the framework says and not how it will enable leaders to act differently in challenging times. So that's kind of the first thing. If we look at the hypos, what we see there is that it shows a very inconsistent success in the identification and succession. And there we see failure in every single one of the steps. So it's not enough consistency in the criteria, it's not enough consistency in the execution. And then very often we see the business acumen of candidates is lacking, so that's underweighted relative to other factors that are really important to predict the leadership success. So organizations are often unable to fulfill long-term requirements through this process because of these quality issues along the way. And it's not a lack of trying. So it's some of, again, trying to scale and use off-the-shelf methods for things that should be very unique. So as a result, talent pools are poor quality, and critical role coverage and succession is lagging, where it's important. And especially when the world is moving as fast as it is now, that's going to be more and more difficult. If we think about the third category of winning the war for talent, so what we see is that organizations spend time and resources implementing generic talent acquisition assessments that produce mediocre results, for typically under the guise of going for scalability. And at the same time, they're trying to optimize the talent acquisition tools and processes for the needs of the business, as they should, but sometimes to the exclusion of the candidate experience. So it can create poor candidate experience, and they can some of the best talent in the pipeline can leave because the process is not great or the experience is not great. So it sends this message that good enough is good enough already in the acquisition process, and forget often that it's a mutual decision around the hiring process. So we're going to do a quick example here to share with you and bring it to life how this can be done differently. So Claude and Lance will go into an example of the candidate experience here.
Yeah, so this is about a 100-plus-year-old healthcare organization, and they believed they needed to evolve their culture and the expectations of what great leaders look like. And they believe that if they don't do that, they're going to run into some real problems, some disruption if they don't pivot to become more of a modern medical technology organization. And the CEO knew that leaders needed to think and operate differently if a transformation was going to be successful. So that's the situation. Lance, what was the initial client ask? What did they want from you?
Yeah, so just to expound on that a little bit, I mean, this is a very successful, tenured organization. But you start to think about healthcare. I'll bet, if I asked all of you, how many people are wearing a wearable right now, a watch or a ring that's giving you some health information, right? And right out of the gate, you start to understand healthcare companies are facing much, much different competition now. And so as they got a new CEO and as they enter their next 100 years of existence, wanting to obviously be just as successful as they have in the past, starting to ask themselves, what needs to be different? And as they've defined their evolving and transforming business strategy, they seeing the culture and leadership expectation strategy that is going to be required to actually enable that transition.
So what was the main problem that they saw?
Yeah, I mean, I think they'd be the first to say, boy, just, a command and control type organization. Sometimes, success breeds some bad habits because you can always fall back on the success that you are having. And so they realize that when you think about, boy, if we're competing against technology companies, are we as agile? Can we pivot? Are we as good at being really customer and patient centric as they are? And so they started to realize it's actually probably a lot easier to redefine the business strategy than it is to actually get people to lead and act in different ways that would enable that business strategy. And so they came to us asking, what can we do for our 20,000 people leaders to enable this change?
What was your main approach?
Yeah, so you start to think about, working with 20,000 leaders. You heard Fredrik talk about the scale, that you can work with frontline leaders at. Here was the same thing. They didn't want, shifting of the Titanic for this to take years on end. They wanted something in the moment within a few months to a year that we can get to 20,000 people and really change things. And so we'll talk a little bit about how we build learning cultures in just a few minutes, but having a few key ingredients here where, of course, there's a focus on world-class content, but there's a real prioritization in terms of what we're asking leaders to do. It's not everything. They got really specific. We help them to do it in the shifts that they need to make. So not just the aspirational behavior, but we think about that legacy behavior. What's the inherent shift in what we're asking you to do? And what are the most prioritized actions we need you to take as leaders? So there's great content, gamified, but at the same time, you need to bring people together. They need to have community. They need to have experiences. And so we offer them really immersive tools to be able to do that, different forms of simulation, highlighting the critical moments where these behaviors were going to get tested and challenged, where we could revert to old behavior when we think about that legacy culture and really juxtapose that against this new behavior that we're talking about, and bringing people together in those pods so they have an opportunity peer-to-peer, coached by someone who can go deep into the content, to talk with one another, to talk about where they've been challenged, where they've been successful, the things that we're asking them to go try, what's going well, what isn't, and to build some vulnerability and humility into the process as well. Of course, every leader all the way up to the CEO went through this process. And what we found was in establishing a really common leadership language and a common mental model that everybody shared, boy, it just made talking about this that much easier.
So I'm sure there were struggles and insights along the way, but what some of the bottom line value creation that you think came out of this?
Yeah, let's get right to it. They found it to be, and continue to find it to be, tremendously successful. We have sort of the perfect A/B test in some ways. So leaders that came through it scored better in every single regard of their employee engagement survey than leaders that hadn't yet. So the whole point was for everybody to go through it. Right. And they're also measuring, think about those business needs, the cycles that they're going through in terms of innovation, pivoting, bringing in customer and patient feedback. They're measuring and improving those cycles as well. Hopefully that's a little bit of a window, a little bit of inspiration of what some of the best companies are doing, getting really real and establishing those expectations, creating playbooks to bring it to life, highlighting those critical moments, people seeing the when and the how, and really comparing that against older behaviors, legacy behaviors that we may have prioritized in the past. We also wanted to talk a little bit about that next bucket and what the best are doing around their hypos. And so, Fredrik, can I pass it over to you?
Sure. Yeah, I think so. We've been doing extensive research in this space over the last 30 years and what hypos need. And we've distilled it down to 5 factors in the motivators, capabilities, and behaviors that are underpinning it. So when we look at, so if you look at the 5 factors, self-awareness, aspirational mindset, business and people acumen, and X factor. X factor is really the organizational specific factor that goes deep on your culture, what it takes to be successful in your company within the constraints and business model that you're operating in. If you're not a hypo, it's maybe okay to be good at 3 out of these 5, but if you are a hypo, you have to be great at all these 5. So that's that's the frame that we use in the assessment of this and also the development of the people. And what's really important when we do this is to look future back and do future back thinking to make sure that all the future factors gets included in this along the way. So if you look at what great looks like here, it's a town strategy that equips the next generation of leaders with like a transparent identification criteria, so they know how they're doing and know what it takes to be a leader there in the longer term, and the ability to measure both for suitability and readiness along the way. So when we look at what we often see here is that business acumen and people acumen are a little underweighted or weighted, not rightly weighted as a company. And especially when you think about the business acumen, the data analysis, the financial acuity, the strategic perspective, enterprise mindset, customer mindset, digital acumen, and balanced judgment and decisiveness is really important. And it's we found here that using simulations to both measure for identification and also looking for readiness and develop around it is really a unique approach to that, and one that gets you at a behavioral level and not staying at the psychometrics, which we know are maybe easier but don't give you the depth of knowledge. So if we kind of take this back to what great looks like across the board here, with the employee or the leadership framework, here we really believe authorship is ownership. It's important to not go the generic route, but let your employees and leaders be part of writing it, because then you don't have to spend so much of your budget on the getting adoption of it later, because that's already started in the creation process. So we'd recommend here to go 75% of your investment in time and effort into the adoption and co-create and co-author upfront, instead of getting in the endless cycle of stakeholder management. If you think about the high potentials, really aligning it to the strategy and consider both the people and business acumen as critical components will be really important. Finally, with the candidate acquisition, thinking about it as much as the candidate realities and understanding their flow and giving them a really good experience along the way will be really critical. A few things here in the case study that you're going to get. There's in the white paper, there's a case study that shows a company that does this really well on the talent acquisition side, where it enables people to get a role preview through using simulation for it, and it's dramatically increased their ability to hire the right people, and it saves them $63 million a year in saved cost or long training and losing people that are not right for the role. So I'll leave you with that and give you back to Lance for the third priority and taking us home.
Perfect. Thanks, Fredrik. Oh boy, Claude said there's a lot of content here. We said no problem, and just a couple minutes here left. So going to cruise through this last priority, scaling the learning culture to help people adapt. We've got a couple of points here that we'd like to make. The first is this: ramping up culture through meaningful people development for persistent impact. So we'll talk about that aspect of a learning culture, as well as creating that learning ecosystem. And boy, there's a lot of talk about this lately, about making that ecosystem adaptive, agile, democratized. Everybody can access it in the moment of need, in the flow of work, right? Rather than people saying, well, it's great, I really value people development, but I don't have the time for it. And so why don't we dive in here and talk a little bit about what isn't working? There's a few things. So, thinking about this historically, it's a project, it's an initiative, rather than this is an ongoing change. Let me ask you, the transformation your business is going through, is it slowing? Is it stopping? And then you think about the follow-on implications of that. You're going to be going through constant transformation. It is only going to be accelerating. And so, the years of going slow and taking years to roll things out, thinking top down, it's far too slow and ineffective. And so we also can't just sit here, sell and tell, assuming that, hey, we value a new learning culture. That's what we aspire to, that it's just going to land by saying it. We'll talk about some of the actions you actually need to take. As well as, of course, getting your executives aligned with this, seeing leadership development as a core part of your business strategy. As you think about building that agile learning culture, there's sort of 4 different ways you could think about this. So you think about that y-axis, the value and impact you're having, versus that x-axis, the capabilities that you're building. And you might bucket these 4 into these areas. There's episodic learning cultures where you see this, it's really, really focused. It is decentralized. The motivation behind learning, it's really to drive productivity, one-off learning that doesn't really build off of other efforts. You could contrast that versus getting to be responsive. And so now we're starting to align on some standard content, right? Like this could be maybe a Six Sigma certification course, right? It teaches people the techniques, the tools for process improvement, but it maybe doesn't necessarily tie back to why those process improvements contribute and how they contribute to the organization's goals. Contrast that versus a continuous phase where learning, training, development, these are about improving organizational performance. And at that point, now it's valued throughout the organization as an actual true core competency. You see leaders, employees, you see the importance of this, that the role that it's going to play in the strategy. And then, of course, agile, which, by the way, very, very few organizations get to. And even the ones that get there, it's really hard to sustain across all of their learning and development. But it's got all the characteristics of the continuous phase, but it's got the addition of being integrated into the flow of work, truly democratized. All sorts of consumption options based on the way that people learn, minimizing the trade-offs that people have to make between learning and working. They truly start to become one. And so obviously a clear challenge here, and wanted to just ask you, as you think about those episodic, responsive, continuous, and agile learning, where do you think your organization is? So Melissa, if we can launch that poll. Give me a minute to think through that.
Yep, so we laid out the different stages for you. Is it episodic, which is, we said, learning focused on specific program solutions; responsive, learning delivered through a mix of targeted programs; continuous, which is ongoing learning focused, improving organizational performance; or agile, proactive, aligned with business objectives, etc. So interesting to see where people are here. And we've seen in our own research, we've seen a shift here. It's definitely getting better, but people are still gearing up. And again, this, I think, pretty much reflects what we found in our research too. Most people are at what we call level 2, which is responsive, about half, a little less than half. So you've got almost 80% still toward the bottom of this. So this is definitely, a journey that people are beginning to take and still have a long way to go. But I know from talking to a lot of organizations, working hard at it, but it's a difficult shift.
It is it is a difficult shift. Thanks, Claude. And wanted to give you a little bit of insight into how, so if building that learning culture, if getting to more of a continuous and agile state is really important, that's the what. Let's talk a little bit about the how. And so what we have found is that scaling that learning culture as a strategic move, part of culture, requires this mix. So you could think about our efforts in these three buckets, right? Providing community, providing content, and providing experiences. Of course, any one of those by itself, it's really not hard to see how it would be ineffective, right? We can build community, we can get people, we can create forums and meetups and mentoring and things like that, but it's not going to scale. It doesn't really have activation. It lacks structure. It lacks purpose from the content and the events that really help to bring this alive. We can go content alone, and boy, for a few years there, it felt like we'll just create a fantastic digital library of content, and that will provide all of the solutions that our people need. And we've seen just how difficult that has been to get people to adopt, right? Because we're lacking community and experiences. And so it feels very alone, right? And so we've seen countless examples where we've got subscription services and a tiny fraction of the organization is actually taking advantage of it. Experiences alone don't work either. Sure, you can have a big hitter experience, they're incredibly engaging, but then it's, hey, what's next? Or it's forgotten. And so connection to relevant content and the vibrancy that communities provide are the missing elements. You can actually try to get 2 out of the 3, and it's better. You can see here maybe what is lacking. For example, when you have community and content without the experience, again, lacking the urgency in learning as truly a strategic enabler of what we're trying to do here. And so very often at BTS, when we're working with our clients, we're trying to bring the perspective of all 3 of these things. And of course, they will be in different mixes, and we will turn the volume up on different aspects of it, depending on the effort, depending on the audience, depending on how big the shift is. We were going to ask you to maybe chat in what's hindering the maturity of your learning culture today, but I know we were running really short on time. And so maybe I will bypass that and I'll go ahead and sum up here. Yeah, so as we think about scaling that learning culture, what does great look like? Well, immersive practice. You heard me start with that. We said building a simulation culture, giving people an opportunity to learn, to make mistakes without actually hurting themselves or business value. Give them immersive opportunities. And listen, the content most people can get their heads around, it's the practice that is really important. Can we align on fewer behaviors to change? It's not going to be everything. We've got to move faster. And as we sit here and try to come up with the perfect model that we're going to use to bolster our learning ecosystem, we can sit here and move much faster and align on the fewer behaviors to change and get alignment up and down the organization as we build those cultures of learning. We've got to be able to shift at a mindset level. So it's not just establishing the capability or the skill. A lot of times what gets in the way of that learning ecosystem is we don't actually get to a mindset level in the shift that needs to happen and a recognition of just how hard and what it will take to shift that and not just learn that new skill or capability. And moving to fully adaptive and agile approach to learning where and when it's needed most. Again, this becomes central to the strategy. It becomes part of the flow of people's work. And so that is what we're aspiring to do. And we're making progress as technology and our perspective gets stronger and stronger here. So with that, we've talked a little bit about, in quick order, these 3 priorities and some of what falls under these priorities. Making bold investments in core leadership. We talked about frontline, mid-level, and executive succession. We talked about accelerating talent systems. So whether it was expectations or hypos or talent acquisition, what we can do to be better. And talked a little bit about scaling learning culture, what it actually means, and a little bit of how you get there. I know we moved fast through the 8 priorities. I hope you found something interesting. Maybe you'd love to follow up and learn more about any of this, but at the very least, hopefully it's provoking a little bit of different thinking as you're seeing what the most progressive organizations are out there doing and having success with. And with that, Claude, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I think we're probably not going to have time for many questions. I can try one quick one that came in here. And you just have to give a quick high-level answer. So given all the expectations on leaders, and they're only increasing, and assuming we can't do everything, if you had to focus on just a couple of capabilities to leave us with here, what would be 1 or 2 that you would focus on before anything else?
I'll take a stab at it. Going back to that research that we showed, that generation 1, 2, and 3, I think what a lot of organizations are doing is they're getting flexible as to what they need. So for example, the last few years, there was a whole lot of focus on those generation 3 leadership expectations, right? And I'll bet a lot of us were participating in that. At the same time, we're seeing a lot of organizations saying, oof, we've kind of lost focus in terms of productivity. And so they're getting back and prioritizing some of those generation 1 capabilities. And so rather than answer the question with the specific capabilities that we might focus on, I would say, your organization, what does it require right now based on where you've been the last few years and what your leaders need in regards to how the trajectory of the business and what the business strategy requires?
Great. Well, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there. I want to thank Fredrik and Lance. Great job. Thank you to BTS again for sponsoring. And really thanks to all of you who took time out of your day to listen to us. We hope this has been helpful. You'll be able to get access to some of these resources, and we will, of course, provide you with a recording and a copy of the presentation. So thanks again. Thanks for taking the time. We look forward to seeing you at another Brandon Hall Group webinar very soon. Take care, everyone. Have a great rest of the week and a great weekend.
Thanks for joining
Bye.
us.